For this evening's presentation, we're thrilled to partner with the Trust for Public Land, a national nonprofit that works to connect everyone to the outdoors. They worked hand in hand with communities to create parks and preserve land where it's needed most. At this time, please join me in welcoming our moderator for the evening, Mitsu Iwasaki, the Associate Vice President and Northwest Director of the Trust for Public Land. Thank you.
A lot of electronics in front of me. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to juggle all of it. I'm keeping here notes in front of me. Is this working? Thank you for being here. You know, there's a bomb cyclone out there, I think, and I know it was difficult to get here tonight. And so much gratitude for all of you being here with us tonight. And there's a number of folks joining online as well. And for folks that are out there online, there is a tangible excitement in this room, and I hope that is translating across the internet onto your screens as well. I know that we've got friends from Colorado, from Wyoming, some in California, and maybe further afield as well. I would say that events like this are only possible because all of you show up. And all the folks online show up. So again, thank you. If you're just arriving, there are organizations that are tabling on the sides of this building downstairs. And if you did not get a chance to interact with them, please do so. They are working day in and day out to ensure that everyone has access to the outdoors. In the audience tonight, I also wanted to just point out Dawa Sherpa. Where are you, Dawa? She is the first Nepali woman to be an IFMGA certified guide. There is a film out there currently circulating, I think, about her journey, your journey, becoming IFMGA mountain guide. Also in our audience tonight is our new CEO, Dr. Carrie Besnet-Hauser, whose leadership and vision helps us connect more people to the outdoors. My name is Mitsu Iwasaki. I am the Northwest Director at the Trust for Public Land. We are a nonprofit that works to connect everyone to the joys and the benefits of the outdoors. Here in the Seattle area, we have done many, many projects, including the Olympic Sculpture Park, the Mountain to Sound Greenway, Waskowitz. It is my belief that every one of us who spends any amount of time outdoors probably touches a TPL project daily. You just may not know that you're doing that. At the Trust, we believe that everyone in every community should have access to safe, free, and quality outdoor spaces. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the history of exclusion and displacement experienced by Asian Americans in our communities. Chinese Exclusion Act, Japanese American incarceration, those were policies, and racism and exclusion is still present today, and many of us feel that. I also feel it's important to acknowledge that the four of us are all East Asian, or East Asian American climbers. That's a lot of hyphens, and to acknowledge that power and privilege are different across Asian communities. So I think it's very important that we acknowledge that as well. Nina, Cody, and Kathy. I think you all are among the strongest and most accomplished climbers in this country. And you are some of the most vocal and outspoken, ensuring that everyone has access, and then we have developing healthy communities. I, as friends and a colleague, have watched all of you with awe and gratitude as you used your platforms to elevate everyone else around you. I typically don't need to reference my notes to talk about friends and colleagues, but they are so accomplished that if I don't reference my notes, I will forget something. In true Asian fashion, you are all so humble that you would never know what you've all done. So Cody, you're a really passionate rock climber and advocate for inclusivity in the climbing community, as well as all of the outdoors. You're also the Director of Advancement Operations at Knowles, and you also serve on the board of the American Alpine Club. There's also a film out there about you also circulating called Dear Mother, documenting your journey back to South Korea to meet your biological parents. Kathy, storyteller at heart, dedicated yourself to reshaping the narrative around climbing and the outdoors. It's earned you a nickname podcast. You are the creator and host of the For the Love of Climbing podcast, executive director of the No Man's Land Film Festival. The first all-woman and genderqueer adventure film festival challenges traditional narratives by showcasing female-driven stories. You also have a new BBC podcast called Chasing Mountains, following 5 mountaineers, women, who try to become the first women to reach the summits of the 14 highest mountains in the world. Nina, you are a professional climber sponsored by the North Face and Scarpa, recognized for your many groundbreaking achievements as a multidisciplinary climber, both in sport, bouldering, and trad. You've climbed iconic routes, including Too Big to Flail, Ambrosia, at the Buttermilks, and you have solo ascent of the Longs Peak Triathlon. You also serve as the board president of the American Alpine Club. Please, everyone, welcome Nina, Cody, and Kathy. So we're all climbers, and let's just start with climbing. Do you all have any projects or climbs that you're particularly interested in? Anything you can tell us about? Secret projects maybe you can't tell us about? You want to start, Kathy?
Hi, I messed up. I sat in the first seat. I think in all my years climbing, I focused so hard on projecting things and picking out hard projects. And there's this mindset in climbing where if you aren't doing something that is at your limit, then maybe you aren't really a climber. And so 2 weeks ago, I was actually in Red Rock with my partner, and we climbed moderates and ate sushi for 4 days, and it was amazing. And he said to me, he was like, not everything has to be so epic. And I was like, oh. So it was actually this really great reminder for me that it's equally important to rest and to do things that feel joyful. It's as important as trying things at your limit. So I think this entire year for me has been about anything that brings me joy personally. And I think I'm just going to focus on making more space for that in 2024.
Thank you.
Yeah, this year is going to be similar for me, especially working, a very demanding full-time senior leadership position. My time to climb is not what it used to be, and I live in the middle of central Wyoming, so there's not a lot of gym facilities there. So we are lucky enough to climb year-round outdoors. But yeah, this whole last year, I had an agreement with a friend that we only would climb 12A through C, and we would just nothing beyond that. That would kind of be our thing. And in Wyoming you can kind of get out in the middle of nowhere where it's you and horses or you and the herds of elk out there. So got way the heck out there and enjoyed that. So that'll mostly be this winter, just up there. We'll trudge up in snow and then climb in t-shirts in the canyons and climb A through C's or maybe a few 13s and just have a good time. So
Dude, the Mod Squad is the best place to be. It's so good. This is probably going to shock many people in this crowd, but I will be spending time in Bishop, California. I've been working on a climb there called the Swarm for many years now. It's a pretty difficult climb for me, and spending one last season to see if I can get it done, and then kind of transitioning into some different disciplines of climbing coming up in 2025.
Awesome, thank you. All of us are climbers, obviously, and we're all Asian Americans. And I think we have these identities that are sometimes at odds with each other. I know that, as my parents were very traditional Japanese, my choice to spend my 20s in van life, and as a climber did not really work well. And somehow I figured out how to balance those two identities. And I'm curious, could each of you share a moment when your identity as Asian Americans and identity as climber felt at odds with each other? Yeah.
I'll take this one first. I was thinking a lot about this question, and it brought me back to one of the first times I traveled outside of the country. I went to South Africa, to Rocklands, which is a really popular bouldering area. And I remember standing around a campfire with a bunch of folks, and just having a great time, feeling very welcomed by that community, just lots of laughter, lots of jokes, we're all talking about climbing. And someone asked me, around that fire, they were like, oh, where, what's your background? Where are you from? And I said, well, I live in the US, but I'm half Chinese and I'm half white. And he was like, oh, so you're a half-breed. And I was just so, I remember like standing there kind of doing this half smile and being like, yeah, I guess so. I guess, I haven't thought of it that way. And I kind of laughed it off. And then hours, maybe, I can't remember if it was hours or days later, but I remember having a delayed reaction and thinking, I actually didn't feel good in that moment. But I didn't really know this person, and I did not feel empowered in that moment to speak up because I hadn't been faced with such a blunt observation of my character. Sure, a half-breed, it seems like a pretty intense word. And I look back at that moment really wishing that I had spoken up in that moment, that I had felt empowered in myself to be able to say something, but I didn't at the time. And so fast forward a few years, I had another encounter with a climber who down the line ended up being my friend, but we met in a climbing gym. He made some comment about being Asian that amounted to, oh, you're half Chinese. He's like, oh, well, I'm 3/4 Chinese. So that must mean that, I'm more Chinese than you or more Asian. And again, he meant it as a joke, meant it not maliciously, but we parted ways for a minute and we're on different sides of the gym. And I just remember getting that same kind of boiling feeling of like, I don't feel good about this. And I sort of stormed back over to him, and he knew. He had this face of like, oh God. And I asked him, I was like, hey, you made this comment about, I'm half Chinese. You said you're 3/4 Chinese. What did that mean to you? And he was like, well, I don't know. I just, I've joked about this with my friends, and it was just a joke. And I was like, do you think that's funny? And he was like, well, not anymore. And I was like, yeah, I didn't think it was funny, and here's why. And I told him, being half Chinese or 3/4 Chinese, to me, it's such a complicated identity, and reducing it to these bare numbers felt pretty raw. And we had a generative conversation around it where he shared some of his experiences around similar situations where a comment like that elicited a visceral response, and he didn't say anything in the moment. And he and I ended up being really good friends down the line. And so I think back to those moments of feeling singled out and wishing that I had spoken up. And that's really affected all of my interactions moving forward, just wanting to spread those conversations to different people.
I thought about this, and I kind of changed how I wanted to address this based on just 15 minutes ago. A gentleman came up to me and described himself as in his 60s, and and he is also Asian American, and he had said that when he was climbing in Jackson, he was like, I was often, Jackson, Wyoming, he goes, I was often the only Asian out there in my group, and all the guys were really nice, but it was, it just was something that had stuck with him. And Mitzi, you and I have had these conversations, and I think of our friend Kim Miller, a mutual friend of ours, Korean American, one of the founders of Black Diamond, and he was often the only Asian in his crew. And it's not that anybody ever in our climbing groups made us feel at odds with our identities, right? But something was there, something unspoken that made us feel that there was a separation, because we're still talking about it, because at 60, somebody still has an experience that sits with them and says, for whatever reason, I felt singled out, not just as a climber. I wasn't always granted the gravitas to be a climber in this group. And I still don't understand, what that is, but it's worth bringing up, because it's not something that is exclusive just to someone who is Asian, right? That could be a woman in a group, it could be a Black person, it could be anything, right? And there's often these unsaid things that could put it at odds. You're not allowed to fully be a climber or whatever the activity is.
For me, when I go climbing essentially anywhere, and right now I'm living in the Southeast, it's a predominantly very, very white area. It feels so obvious to me that I am usually the only Asian American climber at the crag. And it seems like such a small thing, but like I feel it. Like I notice the difference, but I like feel that difference. And so just for like context, I grew up in the suburbs of New Jersey. I'm also a transracial adoptee. And so I grew up in a super, super Caucasian household and an even more white neighborhood. And I think that largely, people in the 80s, they weren't as educated as we are now about transracial adoption. And so I had a lot of questions growing up. And just not a lot of the resources or outlets. And so, I also want to acknowledge that my parents, they did the best that they could for the time that we were in, and I'm super grateful for that. But, the town that I grew up in, which was about 30 minutes outside of New York City, and then even closer to some of the more urban cities in Jersey, it was literally black and white. And there wasn't a very big Asian population in my schools. There wasn't a brown population. And I am going to say this out loud for probably the first time since high school. It's going to sound crazy. I promise I'm not making this up. But there was a black and white cafeteria in my high school. And this was actually all the students' choice. This was also in the 2000s, but our lunch period was split. Like you would go inside and you would get your food tray and you put your food on the tray, and then that area was it would like funnel to these two different cafeterias. And I always felt so much anxiety during lunch period, like about where I would go sit, because I definitely wasn't quote unquote black enough to sit on that side, but I also knew that I technically didn't belong on the other side as well. And so the majority of my friends, my climbing partners, they're all white, right? And so there was a lot of assimilation for me back then. And then I also feel like there is at the crag. And it just feels similar to growing up and what I went through. And so it feels kind of strange to talk about, and even though that I know that all of my friends would really support me and love me unconditionally and like hold that space for me, it just feels strange to bring up. And so I think that a part of me has always tried to make that focus be about what I could do physically, and okay, I'm just super aware of this contrast that I'm seeing, so what can I do to make the focus be less about how I look? And so that turns into climbing performance and that kind of thing. And so I think a lot of that is also just like a product of gender conditioning. Like we tell the boys that they're so strong and capable and smart, and then we turn around and we tell little girls like, you're so pretty and you look so cute. And so I just think for me, holding dual identities today is like, I can walk up to the crag and I can be there and I can be, whatever I want. I can be cute and pretty and also be strong and be capable. as both a woman and as an Asian American climber. So like holding those identities at the same time, I think means embracing them and accepting them and celebrating and actually acknowledging them.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Nina, I often find myself reflecting on the power of narratives and storytelling, and the importance of representation. Asian Americans, we are underrepresented in outdoor and climbing media. As a professional athlete, you are in the public eye, I think probably all the time. Could you share with us how you think about your impact and how you think about reshaping the narratives and representation out there?
I'll preface this by saying it's an ongoing balance. Yeah, I've been climbing for the last 22 years or so, and I've been doing that professionally for maybe 15 or 16 years. And I got into like professional climbing initially for the free gear. I really just wanted to figure out how to not pay for climbing shoes because it was really expensive. And I remember my coach at the time telling me, you know, it's not just about how hard you climb. It's what you're, you know, how you're representing yourself or your sponsors, but also what you're giving back to the community and what you're doing for the people around you. And that advice really shaped the rest of my climbing career in terms of what I think a professional climber can be. And in terms of reshaping the narrative around representation and ourselves as climbers, as athletes, as people, I've really tried to be the most genuine and authentic self that I can be while still being in the public eye and recognizing that there's different versions of ourselves. Like the version of me that is in the public eye is obviously not the version of me that's there all the time. But there's this concept of space that I've been kicking around for the last couple of years actually, and it's like, what kind of space am I creating in myself? What kind of space am I allowing myself to relax and lean into my own identity, and what kind of space am I creating for other people in my community? And I kind of believe that the space that I allow myself, the space to grow, the space to learn, and also the space to experiment and make mistakes and fail, if I can give myself that space to explore, then I can also encourage other people to explore their own space. And how, as this is a little esoteric, so bear with me, but as we can broaden these spaces within ourselves and in our community, then we let people be themselves. And if we allow ourselves to be the various levels of selves that we as complex human beings are at any time. So that's kind of a long way of saying I'm trying to be as open and honest about what I'm doing in the public eye, the projects that I attempt and fail at, not just in climbing, but in life itself. And I actually just did an interview with Alpinist magazine where one of the questions they asked me was essentially like, how do you balance, you know, being a public figure and also not oversharing all the time? And I was like, I might be oversharing at times. But honestly, I would rather overshare at times and just own it in the hopes that other people will open up to people around them and we can all just be embarrassed together.
I hope that you overshare with us tonight as well. Kathy, I know you as a storyteller, you know, the creator and host of For the Love of Climbing, executive director of No Man's Land Film Festival, and now Chasing Mountains as well. I'm really curious how you came into this space and how you view the importance of storytelling.
Do you guys remember in like the early 2000s when blogging was like super, super cool? So For the Love of Climbing had actually started out as a personal blog, and then later it evolved into this storytelling platform. And I had always wanted to show just like a better representation of women, because I wanted to see more women in trad climbing, you know, and that expanded to more LGBTQ community, adaptive climbers, and that sort of thing. And so it was like pretty early on. For the Love of Climbing actually landed this feature in Climbing Mag, and they stuck me right in between a normocast and Evening Sends, which for the time, like, those were like the two prominent climbing medias out there. Like, you know, that was sort of it. And so I remember thinking like, oh, like, how amazing, how cool, like, what can I do with this? And, you know, I definitely like felt a little bit of pride, not only being a woman in climbing media or up and coming person, but also as an Asian American woman. Like, there just weren't either of those at the time that I knew of. And so that was a really cool way for me to write about like my little mini adventures. But then I thought like, cool, I'm gonna keep writing these stories about rock climbing, you know, and I just thought I never have to get a real job, like, sick. But then in 2017, I actually started working for No Man's Land Film Festival, and I was still doing some freelance writing on the side. But then it was 1 year after that, in 2018, I decided to take the storytelling platform and turn that into a podcast. And so for me, both of these storytelling mediums feel really powerful to me. One is visual and the other is just through oral storytelling. Because I think that I realized that storytelling is the most powerful way to put all of our ideas out into the world. And I mean, it even shapes our beliefs and our values, and, you know, educates and inspires us. And I think it can also give us all a little bit of hope, which I just feel like right now, like post-election, like that's something that we can all use a little bit more of, especially heading into 2025. So storytelling to me feels important because the question that I've always asked myself is, how do you change somebody else's mind? And I definitely don't think it's getting on the internet and starting fights in the comment sections. But yeah, how do you change people's minds? You know, when their worldview has never been necessarily challenged by their own life experience. So I think the answer is to tell these stories and invite them to look through this lens of the other person. And in all of its various forms, they provide us the real key to making change. So.
Can we still find the blog? Is that out there in the world?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's on a little hiatus, guys. But yeah, it's still online.
Cody, you led Climb United. It was an effort that convened climbers, brands, publishers to transform culture around inclusivity. Among your first projects was to take on route naming. And at that time, it felt really insurmountable. But you were able to get publishers together, the community together to agree on some guidelines of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. What the rest of the world didn't see is, I'm gonna call it the pre-work that happened before convening. And wonder if you might talk a little bit about the pre-work. And maybe if there's post-work as well, that would be great too.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because the idea of like addressing route naming was a pretty LHF, pretty low-hanging fruit, right? For a lot of folks, it was something that simply needed to be done. But for a lot of people, it was a big row to hoe. And the work before that was actually convincing our sponsors, our brand sponsors, that this work was important and not just route naming. That was a piece of what we were charged with Climb United. But it was convincing brand sponsors that it mattered, that DEI mattered, that inclusion mattered, that this work to bring folks together and understand and celebrate our differences actually mattered. And when we were able to trace back our funding, and I'm looking at Mitsu because we were part of the American Alpine Club at the same time when this happened, all of our funding came from marketing dollars. It didn't come from program budgets or people budgets for HR, things like that. This was marketing. So it was categorically window dressing. And for quite a while, we toured around, I mean, name a big outdoor brand, and we were in those rooms talking with them, talking about DEI, educating them, and building their comfortability with us being folks of the minority, and helping them understand that they would have to learn how to interact across difference, right? And allowing them the time to feel comfortable with that while folks waited for this work to be done. And so a lot of the pre-work was simply educational, and then hoping that through that folks could want to sustain this work and see the value in it. And the other little bit that I'll talk about is it was really chatting with folks who were very opposed to this work. We had people threatening lawsuits. We had folks talking to college professors about censorship. And those conversations were rough. There was one in particular where this fella decided to, in the middle of a restaurant, a family restaurant, use the N-word as loud as he could, saying this is my right, and what you're trying to do should be illegal, and all these things. And it was allowing people then to have space to voice things that they felt like were really important, and they felt like they were taking a moral stance, to build their comfort with this work, right? Because oftentimes we celebrate DEI as work around bringing folks together, when it really, if we look at what it actually is in practice right now, DEI is allowing people of a homogenous majority to understand what it's like to interact with folks of difference. The work that brings us together are the things that we've built in our communities and that others have done in so many communities across different differences across humankind. And so it was a year of that, really. And the post work, and this makes it sound all really dark and dismal. The post work has been great. a lot of publishers, a lot of authors, a lot of first ascensionists are rethinking how they have established routes, how they name routes, how they talk, their language, the ways that we invite people in to develop routes, the ways that we use the lands. There are folks who are donating lands for access for education, for inviting folks of color in to learn how to develop routes and how to do that hard work. And so it's been really beautiful. And a lot of the brand partners we worked with have stood up their own DEI programs, and they've taken their own stance on words and language in their marketing and in their own internal documentation and their HR practices. So it was a lot of hard work. Everything's hard work, and it was a beautiful result.
Thank you. All of us as Asian Americans, I say we encounter behaviors with or without intent. Clarifies that inclusion is still a work in progress. I think that there's often a misunderstanding between inclusion and invitation as long as you assimilate. And yeah, can I ask you all to share your thoughts around this?
Although you just had to listen to me all start because you both already started, so I'll take it this time. I think that yes, I think inclusion, invitation, assimilation, they're on a Venn diagram, and I think inclusion is often conflated with assimilation. I'll just use myself as an example and be very, very transparent in this. I have been invited into a lot of rooms and a lot of spaces, both professionally and events like this, to speak publicly around these topics because I'm a palatable example of what difference looks like and what difference acts like and sounds like, right? I was adopted into this country, and so assimilation wasn't even anything that was thrust upon me as a choice. It was just how I was raised. And so without any ill intent, obviously, my parents who are out here, they're lovely, amazing people, the best parents in the world. I am an example of assimilation, right? And so it affords me an ability to stand on certain stages or work in professional capacities because I can understand both sides of the aisle and of the issue. And I can understand how assimilation is not always viewed as a bad thing, right? It can be blending of cultures. It can be like building a commonality amongst people. And perhaps there is a theoretical and more of a professorial classroom example or conversation to be had there. But in society, assimilation is assimilating up, right, for belonging. Assimilation is saying the folks in the minority you assimilate up to the majority. So in this country, that is whiteness, that is white European, that is you assimilate to the top, and then you can belong. And until then, it's steps of belonging. And when we talk about inclusion, obviously it is you belong as you are, who you are, all are welcome here, and however you show up. And I think that there's going to be a constant struggle with that for as long as humankind exists. But I think that these conversations can help start to soften those edges a little bit.
Is that a move on, which I'm happy to do? I think in climbing and in other outdoor sports, there's an opportunity for all of us, all of you, the entire community, to start making some changes. You know, from your perspectives, what are the changes that we can all start to make to create a more inclusive space?
I think for me, allyship is, it looks like more intentional and active listening for others. You know, it's so easy to just like brush over somebody's words or or brush their experiences off. Or it's also just so easy to like jump in and interject with what you want to say in your own experience. I mean, we want to do that. Like, it's just, I think we're excited to be like, oh, like you too, me too, you know, and bond over that a little bit. But I've always considered learning as a really important and big aspect of allyship. And so I think the best way to learn is to ask people a lot of questions, like that are actively trying to understand somebody else's struggle or where they're coming from, or even just to give them a little bit of space to speak. So creating more compassionate spaces for listening, I think, and understanding is really important now more than ever. And calling in and calling out, like they don't necessarily have to be exclusive.
Sometimes I feel like going a little bit back to that conversation around assimilation and inclusion, recognizing both the differences and the similarities of the people around us. For me, it was actually embracing the difference in the ways that I stood out in my communities. I grew up in New England, a pretty white community, and within the climbing community at that time, there were not very many Asian Americans. There was actually a running joke between some of the folks in that community, my coaches, again, well-meaning, but they're like, oh, if you're Asian or if you're half Asian, you've got a secret strength in climbing, because there were a few Asian American, like the few Asian American climbers in that crew were like on the stronger side. And so it was being othered, it was being pointed out as a difference, but it was also sort of a compliment. And I also grew up on a climbing team where I was only one of two young women. And so I sort of developed somewhat of a spite. Like, I wanted to prove myself that I could be more than my identity. I could be more than just being the only girl on the climbing team. I could be more than just the only one of the few Asian climbers in that area. So I used that as a strength. But going back to the original question around being a good ally and looking at other people who seem different or are standing out, or in that same vein, not standing out, who are quieter, just having conversations with folks and going back to what you said, Kathy, just being willing to listen to them, asking questions, listening to their responses, getting a vibe, if you will, of if they are feeling different themselves and supporting that difference, but also if they are withdrawing into themselves and just being a little more curious and asking more questions always. Again, the concept of creating space and inviting people to step into your space and vice versa.
I love that. Lead with curiosity.
I think it's really important, and I feel like this word gets overused a lot, to be brave, and in this space, I mean brave, like to be vulnerable when you're in these spaces where inclusion is called for, right? So if you're out climbing with folks that are different from you, it's like it can be a little unnerving, right? That you're going to say something wrong, that you're going to act a certain way because you don't know. You know, you're generally not climbing with people that look different than you. Or I'll use an example where I felt like an idiot. We were out climbing with a group for an event, and they're called the Fat Senders. And this lady, Sunny, who describes herself as a fat climber, we're all, like bouldering, and we're kind of climbing like hardish things. And like, well, shoot, this is like, I don't know how to approach this with Sunny, because we're climbing these like kind of steep roofs, and she's not like engaged or having fun, and I kind of like got nervous. I was like, I don't know what to do. So I grabbed like wire brushes and like climbing brushes and like went up this slab and like just started like scraping off this boulder. I was like, oh freaking no, like I just need to move because I feel awkward right now. Like I kind of like developed this like slab boulder and like chalk up some hands. I was like, oh freaking no, Sunny, do you want to climb a slab? She's like, oh, I love slabs, bro. Like, yeah, sick. Like, this is great. And I was like, I don't like, no. She's like, yeah. She's like, I'm fat. Like, it's okay, dude. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do here. Like, I feel so awkward. But it was a great day. Like, then we just ran around like the Wyoming mountainside, like scrubbing boulders. And like, she got all these first ascents and it was awesome. But I had to be like super vulnerable and like, wow, I think I'm good at this work. I'm like, I suck at this work right now. So like, yeah, vulnerability is an okay thing.
Somehow I'm going to have to work in scrubbing boulders into my daily language. I think, is there a QR code or some such to look at, or how do you say that? I'm too old to know what to say. QR code.
Did you say to look at?
You can look at that QR code if you like.
Admire this QR code. With your phone's camera, you can take a photo of, just point your camera at it, and you can submit a question in real time to Mitsu, who may or may not understand how to use his iPad to read the question.
Or you could just admire it. You've all done some amazing things climbing and as public figures. And I think that also required or created an opportunity to live in your vans for a while and kind of dirtbag it for a bit too. Any memorable dirtbagging moments that you'd like to share? Overshare?
No, it involves poop. I can't do it.
Do it. Horrible. It's only poop.
Yeah.
Dude. Basically, okay, I spent some time in a van, and it was nighttime, and I really had to use the bathroom. I really had to poop, and it was dark out, and I went outside of the van. I can't believe I'm talking about this. I went outside of the van. I, went far away. I dug a hole, and I'm doing my thing. And, I had used my phone as a flashlight to go and do my business. And my phone was in my pocket, and suddenly it was not in my pocket. And I didn't really notice until I was like, wow, my pocket's kind of light. And I looked down in the hole. And my phone was in the hole. Yeah, that's the story.
In solidarity with you, Nina, you've reached a new rock bottom when you're not even camping like out in the wilderness, but you're crashing at your ex-boyfriend's dad's house because you're still homies. He's a climber, you're a climber. Come stay in the van with your new boyfriend.
This is some tea.
And similarly, it was just like the middle of the night and just, I felt like I couldn't go into the house. I'm sure I could have got into the house, but I opted not to go in the house and pooped in a bag, took my bag, hid it, and drove off with it the next morning. New rock bottom. Solidarity.
All right, I'll use the other side of the body. My friend Blair is here, and Blair was there was 4 of us went up. Wait, were you on this trip? Maybe you were. I forget. Anyways, we went up the Grand our first time, like this quick day up there, and like it was my birthday, and so like we're on the top of it. You're like right below 14,000 feet, and they hand me like a little thing of whiskey and a couple of beers. I'm like, hell yeah. So I'm like slamming these. I'm like, wait, this is a bad idea because like we're really high up here. I'm going to get super drunk. We have to get back down. And we were just soloing. So I was like, great. So we like get down, we do our thing, and we're like slamming beers afterwards. And I don't drink anymore. And this is part why. So like, I didn't live in my van, but I had my van. It was parked outside my friend's hotel room, and we were like super drunk. And apparently, I confessed like my feelings for a friend that I didn't know I had these feelings for. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" I was like, "I don't know what's happening. What's just going on right now?" So I'm in my van. I'm like, "Oh no!" Like I've been drinking all day and climbed the mountain and all this stuff, and I'm like puking in a garbage bag and like have this really sad movie going on because I'm like really in my feelings. And my friend Bria like walks up. She like opens the door. She's like, "How are you? You're not okay right now." And I'm like, mid-puke, I'm like, I'm so bad right now, you don't even know. And then I also went outside my van and dug all these holes in the parking lot and just started puking in holes and then buried it. So if you go to Jackson, like the Elk Hotel, I think, or something like that, like right before the park, somewhere, there are holes full of my puke still. So, I mean, this was a long time ago. It's probably all dry.
It was last summer.
All right, we're going to move on to some serious questions. I don't know how we do this. I have always viewed many first ascents as having the privilege, or making first ascents as having the privilege, time, and ability to put up routes. It just turned off. As a result, most American routes are established by white men. I've always felt uncomfortable deferring to first ascensionists to have the final say on the ethics of certain routes. How do you feel about the need to respect the first ascensionist vision of a route, whether that's about bolting or the number of bolts, name, style, etc.? Anyone want to take that on?
I'll briefly mention, I actually climb a lot with a friend that he's been climbing for, 40 years at this point, and a lot of the stuff out in Wyoming was developed when the ethics were shockingly different than they are now. Huge runs, big runouts between bolts, and sometimes the vision was less than enjoyable, and we commonly we'll reach out to folks and ask if we can move bolts, make it safer, add bolts. We want more people out there enjoying it and feeling safe. But Chris, as an older, he's a 50-year-old white man now at this point, he's kind of stopped asking and just does it. Because at the point, he's like, it's a rock, and it's some metal in a rock. And somebody went up 20 years ago and put a route up. He's like, why do I care anymore? What their vision was, we want people to have fun. And so he's kind of taken that stance, which I'm a big fan of, because now more people are enjoying it, and the bolting's safer, and the vision's much more fun to climb. So
I'll maybe push back a little bit on that, actually. Mostly in that, when I think about a first ascensionist, I consider the motivation behind that person's desire to go up and put up a first ascent. I think historically it's been very colonial in that people, usually white men, are like, oh, this is going to be my route. I own it. I have birthed it, and it's I am taking ownership of it. And I disagree with that in this day and age. I think once a route or a boulder problem goes up, it now belongs to the community, because it's like, who as first ascensionists of today, who are we doing this for? Are we doing it just for ourselves, or are we doing it to give back to the common good? And in that vein, I do believe there should be a community conversation around whether bolts get added or names should get changed, because it's a group thing. The classic example being Snake Dike in Yosemite. It's like a super classic 5'7", I believe, 5'6", 5'7", but with bolts that are spaced. There's probably 30, 40, 50 foot, maybe more runouts between bolts. And there have been a few pretty traumatic falls, some of them resulting in fatalities on this route. And so there's been this big conversation around like, well, do we add a bolt for safety to make it more accessible? And I'm a little biased. I engage in some higher risk type of climbing. And so I think we need a little danger in climbing still. I don't want everything to be safe all the time. I don't necessarily want things to be so accessible that any person can walk up it, and willing to be challenged on that a little bit. But I just think stuff like that at least should be a community conversation, in the spirit of allowing everyone to have a voice.
I just want to echo all of your sentiments, essentially. I do agree, and there's like a historic aspect to something like that, a climb like that, and so many others, that I think is really special, and I do appreciate the boldness that it takes to go do something like that, whether it was 10 years ago or 50 years ago or last year for some folks. But that being said, moving forward, I agree that there should be more of a conversation around it. And also there is a plethora of untouched rock in just this country alone that is waiting for more first ascensionists. And I hope more of them are people of color, women of color, adaptive climbers, like LGBTQ, it's your FA, you make the rules. So I'd love to see more of that in the future to come.
Any of you have any advice for facilitating spaces that have limited seats, clinics, workshops that are marketed as BIPOC, but there isn't strong presence of Black or Indigenous folks? How might you go about improving community outreach to those groups?
I didn't hear the last part of the question, sorry.
I just deleted the
Oh, you
question.
deleted it. Shoot.
How might you improve outreach to those groups?
Just so I think I'm understanding this right, it sounds like sometimes in clinics and workshops there are a limited number of spaces, and how do we prioritize space for Black and Indigenous folks? I'm seeing some head nods, yes. I think this is an interesting question, considering I've taught a lot of clinics and workshops, and there are those spaces reserved specifically for Black and Indigenous folks. That being said, I as the clinic instructor, I'm not Black, I'm not Indigenous, and so there's a question of am I the right person to be teaching those types of clinics? If the space is intentionally around being that identity, no. But if the space is intentional around climbing generally, and I want to have as many folks experience that if they're signing up for a clinic with me, then yes, how would I, again, I'm sort of rephrasing this question, how would I make sure that there are enough space for Black and Indigenous folks? There's a part of me that asks, how are we supporting Black and Indigenous climbers to the point where we have more Black and Indigenous climbers signing up for those clinics, to where we would have to prioritize them? And I think it's worth acknowledging that those communities are not exactly overflowing in the climbing community right now. So how can we continue to uplift those particular groups so that we're having that problem? I'm not sure if we're there yet. So I don't have a complete answer to that right now, But I think continuing to acknowledge that lack, that opportunity, if you will, and also acknowledging, I kind of want to point out just in these conversations around diversity and equity and inclusion in the outdoor space, it takes time to commit to the sports that we love here. And so it's not just an identity thing, it's a class thing. It's a financial issue. And acknowledging that time is money and figuring out how to give time as money to these communities so that they have the opportunity to participate more in climbing and skiing and mountaineering is a conversation that we should be having more broadly. And I don't feel like I hear it often enough.
I think that a lot of that, about the lack of perhaps like population or interest in it from other cultures or, specifically Black and Indigenous people, I think that is, it's also an issue of like how we as climbers engage with the land, right? Like, it's a great privilege to be able to spend so much time outside, and we get a little bit rowdy, we get a little bit chaotic. We like the danger, we like the battling nature and exploring these expansive, beautiful places, right? These like common terms we use. And for a lot of like my Indigenous friends, like battling nature is not something that really resonates with them, right? Like nature cares for them. They care for nature, and we think of this like I'm fighting this climb to like find a way through. And similar, like I wax poetically about like the expansive, beautiful like aspects of these big open spaces, and I'm not trying to speak for people, but like some Black friends I have are like, it's not totally how I feel about the outdoors yet. And so like I'm out there with you and you're having this experience and I don't feel like I'm attached to it. And that's not to say that's how everyone feels, right? But I think that there are ways that we engage that just don't feel that, or they don't resonate with everybody else. So how does that fill seats in affinity spaces? I have no idea. I think it's a broader cultural shift that's still in motion, and those seats will naturally fill themselves, right? No matter how much we want to, for very altruistic reasons, folks build affinity spaces for themselves. And allowing folks to call themselves into those might be the slower path, which sucks. But sometimes, those hard truths are things that we're still dealing in.
I just want to preface with this with I also don't know what the answer is, but I think this is a really interesting question, and I'm coming at it from more of like a event community organizer perspective. But No Man's Land, we started doing film festival grants, and in the beginning it was for women, and we always funded a female filmmaker. And then I was so psyched when we could bring our first Black female filmmaker grant to fruition. That was amazing. That was in 2020. We're so psyched. And then the year following, our first Indigenous female, and now a genderqueer film grant. In the last 2 years, we have had no applicants for our Black female filmmaker grant, and we were getting the money and we didn't know what to do with it. And so, we put it back in the film fund, but I mean, we put the message out there, we put it in newsletters, and all I could think was, I wonder if people just don't know. And then I also started thinking about like resources. I was like, well, maybe they're seeing it, but they're like, well, so we get the money, but like, then what do we do? Like, maybe they don't have the additional resources. And so when I think about like, maybe, something like a clinic, and I'm assuming it meant that they were booked with other people and maybe they weren't being signed up by other Black or Indigenous or people of color. And, in Chattanooga, there's a nonprofit organization, We Climb Chat, and it's focused on urban climbers, young kids, Black kids in the area, and they have to shuttle the kids. So maybe something like they don't have maybe they know that it's there, but they can't sign up and they can't get to the place because they don't have a car, they don't have a ride, or they don't have gas money. So I mean, it's a lot of rallying you have to do around one event, one grant to make it all happen. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder if that's a moving part, a big moving part of it is just lack of resources.
We're gonna run out of time here soon, so I'm gonna change it up a little bit. Who are other Asian American climbers that you all admire, and what is it about the way that they move through the world that that is particularly compelling. Other Asian American climbers that you admire, and what is it about the way that they move through the world that is particularly compelling to you? That's a lot of R's and L's that I'm trying to pronounce. After that's a lot of brain gym and yeah.
This one's a little bit not fully Asian American, but he speaks perfect English, so I can say Asian American in that way. His name's Hoseok Lee, and if anybody follows him, Hoseok, last name Lee, he's based out of South Korea. Amazing rock climber. I mean, ridiculously strong. Double-digit V boulders, like he'll climb them the right way, and then he'll do it backwards, and do it campusing. And he just moves through the world in a way that I, as an Asian American, really admire, where he is just a rock climber, and he's just a person, and he's just strong, and he's just unapologetic. And you know, as the common butt of the joke in America is like the weak, nerdy Asian male, that was not something I like really felt when I was younger. And so he's, I don't want to admit how old I am, but he's like 15 years younger than me, and he's in his 20s. And so like I'm like, wow, this kid is like crushing it. And he's not a kid, he's an adult, but he's crushing it, and he has like all this confidence. And so I've been very inspired by that. And again, he's not Asian American, but I'm going to take it anyways. So.
Am I allowed to say Cody and Nina?
No.
Yes.
I'm going to say Cody and Nina because I just think y'all are awesome, and you're just so genuine and just authentically yourselves. And to me, that is very inspiring. So I draw a lot of inspiration from you too.
Stop it.
You hang up first.
My answer's automatically stuck compared to that.
I gotta shout out Dawa Sherpa, honestly. Like, whew. I've gotten to know Dawa a little bit through her being a fellow North Face athlete with myself, and just seeing the work she does, not only in her climbing, but in her community. Being able to blend those two is really inspiring for me. So.
Thank you. We're out of time, unfortunately. We could stay here all night, but probably we can't. So thank you so much, Nina, Cody, and Kathy. And thank you to all of you. And thank you to Cody's parents. Where are you? Let's just give them a big clap as well. And TPL, our work is to connect everyone to the outdoors. We, the organization, are advocating for the Outdoors for All Act. It is bipartisan and will allocate funding to create parks and enhance outdoor recreational opportunities, especially in indigenous communities and communities with limited park access. There is a QR code that, that you can look at. And through that QR code, you can let your senators know that you stand behind the Outdoors for All Act. So please join us in advocating for that work. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.